Have you ever wondered why the term young adult literature refers to books for readers aged 12 to 18 instead of age 18 and up?
Or if the term is so confusing, why has it stuck around for so long?
I mean, isn't adulthood implied in the title?
Why hasn't it changed?
My name is Don Martin. I'm a young adult fantasy author of the book Verity Vox and the Curse of Foxfire.
And I'm Danny Heber, PhD in linguistics and host of the channel Linguistic Discovery.
And we're here to tell you about the history of the term young adult literature. Young adult literature is actually a technical term, or jargon, used inside of book-related industries like publishing, retail, and libraries. But books are also a big part of popular culture and have a lot of crossover in non-industry spaces, like social media, where the conversation can get kind of confusing. It doesn't help that in recent years, adult books have been mislabeled and shelved as young adult, causing an influx of adult eyeballs in spaces that were never intended for them. A lot of confusion as to who those books are even for, and why we don't call it something like teenage fiction to help clarify the matter. The funny thing about books being both an industry and a part of pop culture means that our industry's jargon is put under more scrutiny than other specialized fields, like aerospace engineering or veterinary medicine. There isn't as much confusion or outcry over a veterinarian telling you they have to express an anal gland, for example. Nobody thinks they mean they're helping the gland use its words. I don't think we actually really care what anyone calls it. We just don't want to be the one to do it. Young adult literature as a term has a long, rich history going back at least a couple of centuries. All the way back in 1802, English writer and critic of British children's literature Sarah Trimmer outlined young adulthood as describing a distinct age group. Back then it was 14 to 21 in her periodical The Guardian of Education. She was one of the first to differentiate books for children and books for young persons, codifying an age group that is mostly still used today. Whereas the term teenager hadn't even been invented yet. In fact, the first recorded use of the word teenager wouldn't be until over a century later when it first appeared in print in 1913. And even then, it appeared as two words, teen-ager. It wouldn't become the singular term we know today until 1941. During that time, industry professionals, librarians, beginning in the late 1920s, felt the need to categorize fiction that was intended to describe the lives of adolescents, books that those young people might self-select to read. These were often love stories, but as the years went on and the category became more complex, we saw detective stories, fantasy, science fiction, and other genres enter the space. The term was intended to describe the distinct lived experience of people who were leaving childhood and becoming adults. It was also used to respect their maturity, autonomy, psychology, and culture. Those librarians called this group of people, beginning around age 12 to 14 and ending somewhere around 18, young people or young adults. All the way back in 1962, one French historian argued that the reason we didn't use the term teenager is because teenagers weren't a designated demographic in most respects until World War II, due in part to advances in psychology and sociological changes like the abolition of child labor. But okay, you say, sure, we did things that way a century ago, but we have the term teenager now, so why don't we use it when describing books for people in that age range, especially if it's causing confusion now? That goes back to the fact that the term young adult is a technical one inside of an industry, and when it comes to technical terminology, these words don't change very fast because the precision of language inside of an industry is important. However, I do respect that because the book industry intersects with pop culture, there might be a need to stop using jargon in public spaces and turn instead to colloquialism. But then what would we change it to? Sure, teenager works, but so does adolescent, so does minor, so does juvenile. But maybe we get even more specific and start labeling books by grade level. Each of these terms could be used, but each comes with their own baggage. Teenager leaves out young readers who are currently included in the term. Juvenile implies that these stories are childish or lack maturity, whereas young adult is an attempt to recognize the maturity and importance of the lives and culture of young people. Thus, there is a reason we continue to use jargon even in public-facing spaces. Technical terms need to remain unified, especially in public places. Otherwise, when you go to pick up something like Aristotle and Dante in a library or bookstore, you could find it in teen fiction in Delaware, young adult romance in Arizona, juvenile LGBT stories in Oregon, or adolescent drama here in Illinois. Okay, but maybe you still have questions. Maybe you're wanting to know why technical terms don't change very quickly at all. Well, I'm a sucker for anyone wanting to know the why behind the what, so I asked linguist, friend, and former guest of my podcast Head on Fire, Danny Heber, to explain why some parts of our language don't evolve as quickly as others. Take it away, Danny.
Whenever speakers create a new word or phrase, they treat it as a whole, as a single unit. We stop paying attention to the pieces within that term. If you've ever heard of Gestalt psychology, this is a great example of that. We associate the meaning of that term with the entire word or phrase, not its individual parts. In linguistics, we say that this new term has been lexicalized, or added to the lexicon, the vocabulary of your language. A really good example of this is the word blackboard. When the word blackboard was first created, it made perfect sense because it was literally a black board that you wrote on. But even though the technology and the materials used to create blackboards changed, the term stayed the same. Nobody really paid attention to the fact that a lot of blackboards aren't black anymore. A lot of them are actually green. And that's because as speakers, we don't pay attention to the internal structure of terms like that. It's a single unanalyzable chunk in the minds of speakers. Another great example is the word takeout. Takeout originally referred to going to a restaurant, getting the food, and taking it out of the restaurant. But today, that meaning is expanded to also include delivery. Again, we've stopped paying attention to the internal pieces of that word, and now we just know the meaning of the term takeout. So similarly, when the term young adult literature was first coined, it made perfect sense. People were generally considered adults after puberty. But as the cultural conception of adulthood changed and we introduced this new term teenager, the term young adult literature didn't change because people weren't paying attention to the internal pieces of that term. Everybody in the publishing industry knows what the term young adult literature refers to, independently of what the words young and adult mean. The term young adult literature is more than just the sum of its parts. It's more than just the meanings of the words young, adult, and literature. And all this is a great example of how language can fossilize certain perspectives or ways of seeing the world. The term young adult literature is a remnant of a time when society viewed people as adults after puberty. It's like a linguistic fossil that gives us a glimpse into how earlier generations viewed the world.
Hope this helps.
Thanks for watching.